and welcome. I'm Gavin Ashenden. This is Catholic Unscripted. It's Pride Month, but it's also the Sacred Heart of Jesus month. The Pride flag is flown everywhere, and there are lots of Catholics of the James Martin variety who think we should be endorsing the Pride flag. But actually, it's time to challenge it and to replace it with our devotion to the Sacred Heart. The rainbow flag is flown everywhere in June. It's not, though, what it pretends to be. Its ubiquitous success feeds off our corporate naivety and gullibility. But what it really does is to present us with the challenge of distinguishing good from evil, for which we need the gift of discernment and the capacity. After all, Jesus never took it for granted the church would find this task easy. His own experience, as you'll remember, was set in the context of a desert confrontation with the devil, right at the beginning of his public ministry. During these confrontations, what was the technique evil used? Well, it lied to him under the pretense of good outcomes. Jesus warns us, his followers, not to take people and their mission at face value, because evil can always be expected to masquerade as good. St. Paul begged the early Christians to test the spirits. The presumption is that we're going to be faced with different strategies from evil as it tries to present itself as good. And perhaps the single most effective strategy of evil today doing this is the ubiquitous pride flag, especially in June. So, June is Pride Month. The Pride flag is everywhere. Compassionate Catholics are urged to add their moral and emotional weight to the Pride project. The components of the Pride project are, in fact, really quite powerful. They mix together two components, one spiritual, one secular. The first is a deeply compelling moral imperative for the Catholics to reach out to the underdog, the victim, the marginalized, in order to offer the love of God to people who find themselves on the margins, in the name of love. And the second is the protection and promotion of those who find themselves and their true identity through the prism of whom they want or need to fall in love with. Well, immediately we're straight into euphemism land, where one word or an idea is used to replace, or in this case, to disguise another. Falling in love, the search for the perfect other, became the new religion in the 20th century. It was Hollywood's major contribution to entertainment. We overdosed on the promises of romance. The quest for romance and sex became the most well-trodden way in the search of personal fulfillment and happiness. We looked to falling in love with the missing other to solve all our problems, our deepest needs, and our hunger. Initially, our culture was coy about the sexual elements in the quest, but in the 1960s, we threw off Christian inhibitions, and the coy quest for love became a full-on addiction in the erotic hunt. If the church dared to question the wisdom of a quest for sex free of moral constraints, well, we were accused of prudery. Christians were told to suspend their moral legalism and to make allowances for the same-sex attracted, particularly, who it was felt had been confined to the margins, the social margins, unable to find love and affection, and yes, sex on the same terms as everyone else. So gay pride was born. And it very quickly morphed from a defensive strategy to protect the same-sex attracted victims from social exclusion, real or imagined, into a weapon to replace Christian morals and ethics and destroy the faith itself. I was very moved when I first came across Gore Vidal, the author, the intellectual. He was responsible, he claimed, almost single-handedly for inventing the whole idea of gay and gay pride. And he did it initially to protect his gay friends. But as time went by, he saw that what he'd done was to create a category of humanity that was completely reliant on sex for its identity. And he knew too much about the complexity of the human person, the beauty of all that we are, that goes far beyond just our sexual longings, to be content with doing that. And so he gave up on the whole project of gaiety and pride and dropped it because he thought the cost of trying to present human beings just in terms of their sexual identity was too great and denigrated everything we were supposed to be and called to be. Well, the pride flag turned out to be a Trojan horse. Within what looked like an innocent movement designed to celebrate compassion and justice, there emerged a host of ideologies with more aggressive ambitions. The culture moved from an invitation to express solidarity to threats against anybody who questioned it and aspired to what was called heteronormativity. Turned out that compassion had been used to bait a hook, and at the other end of that hook there was a new and very different authoritarian world order envisaged. Everyone, it seemed, to be a little naive in the way we'd understood love, in the lexicon of the same sex attracted. It wasn't just the quest for affection, but the full-on pursuit of pleasure and sex as well. A dramatic profile given to leather and bondage gear prominent in every pride parade might have offered us a clue, but if it did, very few picked it up, and those who picked it up weren't allowed to talk about it. Even if they had, the celebration of sex outside heterosexual marriage turned out not to be the deepest threat, surprisingly. Behind the reconfiguration of sexual ethical norms was a power struggle to reshape the politics of our whole social order. And although sexual appetite looks like one of the more dramatic issues that Christianity confronts in the turbulence of our corporate human disorder, the quest for power and control is far more dangerous. Sex may look like the most dramatic of the two, but power is more serious. The pride flag looks like it's about love and sex, but actually it's about power, coercion, and politics, which is why it's so dangerous. The project presents itself as a cause rooted in compassion and love, but it's a complex love that includes making a commitment to hedonism only as the first stage, for that in turn masks a bid for political power and ideological control. Who sees, when looking at the rainbow flag, beyond the initial call for inclusive compassion and discovers the determination to force compliance to this new ideology? Who glimpses the iron fist of the totalitarian state lurking in the shadows? But within only a few years, the rainbow flag has moved beyond the siren call to inclusion, compassion, and morphed into a compulsory agenda for a culture of conformity, where any deviation from the new anti-heterosexual norm is punished by, well, social and media exclusion for a start, and maybe losing your job, and soon, perhaps, because of the addition of hate crime, the threat of prison. So true inclusion, if that's what they'd meant, but they didn't, would have allowed for a mixed economy of Christians and the emerging neo-pagans, but true inclusion was never intended. It was always intended to be used to throw dust into the eyes of society, and particularly the church, too seduced by the call of compassion to notice the inherent contradiction between hedonism and continence. The pride flag stands, in fact, for a new world order, profoundly antagonistic to Christ, and the message he brought that we are accountable to a cosmos infused with a morality that reflects our holy Creator. The New World Order began with a demand for love and sex, slipping quickly into an unrestrained hedonism and then into this growing political totalitarianism that intends to impose the new values. It turned out to be much more ambitious than anyone guessed at the beginning. It wanted not just to overturn the Christian moral order, but to eradicate the whole Christian vision. Attacking heterosexual marriage was only the first stage of the project. The responsibility of the individual was to be replaced by the political integrity of the collective. Identity politics would define who you were and where you found your place in a new hierarchy of victimhood. But the mantra of inclusion had a very different agenda. It was to be very particular about who was to be included, and it secretly, of course, involved new categories for exclusion, but without telling anybody. So it was to exclude protection for babies in the womb. It was to exclude protection for vulnerable and the frail elderly, no longer valued because they were human in the project for euthanasia, no longer wanted because they were no longer useful. It was to exclude safety for teenagers who would become sudden prey to a new medical establishment, making the most enormous sums of money out of forcing them to be dependent on anti-puberty drugs for the whole of their lives, and only too willing to medicalize the social contagion of gender dysphoria, to diagnose surgery, to create a generation condemned to sterility. The rainbow flag becomes as multi-layered in its ambitions as it is multicolored. It signifies social inclusion for those who refuse to conform, sterility for the gender confused, for the very young, for the very old, untimely death, and perhaps for some others, prison. It's only recently that Catholics and others have become more aware that the pride flag had been misrepresented as a rallying cry for compassion and inclusion. It is in fact the flag of an enemy who seeks, at first by subterfuge, but now by force, the obliteration of all things Christian. The iron fist behind the rainbow glove has been unmasked by the description of cultural Marxism, a fresh iteration of the totalitarian instinct that crushed the churches that lay behind the Iron Curtain under Marxism 1.0. The roots of Marxism 1.0 can be traced back to the French Revolution. Both shared in a vision for the utopian secular outcomes that first required the destruction of the church and involved a full-on attack on Jesus. As it happens, we Catholics have our own symbol for the month of June, one that is also intended to liberate with compassion a lost and a confused generation. It is devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And this is really quite interesting because it may not be a coincidence that although the original encounter between Jesus and Mary Alacoque, the vision took place in 1674, the first time the whole month of June was given over to its celebration was actually during the French Revolution itself. It's almost as if these two ideologies first came to confront one another as the French Revolution launched its violent and anti-Christian challenge against Christendom, marking almost the beginning of the modern secular era. For the French Revolution and devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus represented two wholly different and antithetic ambitions for humanity, one to do with pride, the other really to do with love and humility. But since, as we know, evil cannot create, it can only borrow and distort and pervert, there may be little surprise that secular totalitarianism dons a disguise to hide its quest for ruthless control. Instead, it clothes itself in the garb of social justice and compassion. The basic conflict for the soul of humanity might be most effectively presented as being between the polar opposites of authentic love manifested in the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the raw, ambitious power of the secular state in totalitarian mode masked by that rainbow flag. As time has gone by, this disguise of compassion and inclusion in the Rainbow Coalition has worn thin, and we can see through it more clearly. For the revolution has started to eat itself as the trans activists turn violently and aggressively on the people they call the TERFs, the feminists. The terms of the engagement have emerged, and a much more realistic picture of the stakes and the quest for power has emerged. Well, with June upon us, and the now usual campaign to have the rainbow banner of totalitarianism thrown throughout the buckling West, we Catholics might well consider responding this month, not just by turning our backs on the rainbow symbolism, but by recovering our allegiance to the devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and display the image of the Sacred Heart on flags outside every Catholic church, on posters in the windows of every Catholic home, perhaps on the lapels of our clothes. Devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus is the antidote to the campaign to reconfigure our society and our values in a way intended to exclude God. True love confronts incontinence. Forgiveness challenges implacable hostility. Created purpose instead of collective control. The destiny of the call to heaven as opposed to the socially engineered violence of authoritarian compliance. It was devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus that rescued our ancestors from the unforgiving grasp of paganism once before, as we converted the West with the love of Jesus. And with the eruption of this new paganism and a new authoritarian and restrictive social ambition, it's time to do it again. Let's rededicate ourselves this month to the devotion to the Sacred Heart and make it visible and vocal.